finally, I am now able to talk about my short-term review. Well, not review, but like experience with the new GFX 100S Mark II. Should be this guy here. So I've originally owned the GFX 50S Mark II maybe a year ago, and that was my very first exposure to like a digital medium format sensor camera, mirrorless camera, sorry. And man, I was so blown away by just the build quality and especially the image quality that comes out of that big sensor. And I've been a fan since. And it's great too because I started out with adapting vintage lenses with my GFX. I started out with the Manola 45 millimeter MD MC, or I'm not sure if it was MD or MC, but I believe it's the MD Record f2.8 or 2, somewhere there. Was able to cover the whole sensor. The very soft vignetting on the corners, but if I were to stop down by like 2 or 3 stops, it's gone. It's completely gone. And the image quality and just like the combined medium format sensor and equipped with like a vintage like lens adapted to it gives so much character to the point that I felt like I was taking film photos, which is a crazy thing to say, but just like the combine that effort of just like the color science that comes out of the GFX, it's a dream come true. Started using GF native lens, like the I think the 32 to 64, or like I think it's a 32 to 70 millimeter kit lens, then the 80 millimeter f1.7 lens. Probably my favorite telephoto lens for like portraits or even street photography, because like 80 sounds pretty tight, but the fact is that the medium format sensor, it's bigger than a full frame. You actually times it by a 0.8 crop factor, making the focal length wider. So it's like the opposite of a crop sensor, and timesing the focal length to that, making the focal length tighter. So it's weird that it's opposite for me at the time. Like I just had to get used to calculating that crop factor and reminding me myself that whatever lens I adapt to or use on my GFX, everything will be much wider. And I was so astonished about the sharpness that comes out of like the GF native lens. Maybe it's just me that's seeing this, or maybe it's just fanboying over the image quality. But when it comes to the JPEG or even the RAW files coming out of the GFX with a native lens, the sharpness is so good, but it's not like overly sharpened like you would typically see on like smartphones, or even I would probably say like Sony clinical sharpness. And it's just a weird way for me to like, it's hard for me to describe how I feel when I look at the sharpness that comes out of the medium format sensor. It's super sharp, but it's not clinical sharp. It doesn't look fake. It looks so natural sharpness. And on top of that, it's just like the very buttery smooth subject separation from like the background. It hits different, and ever since then I just fell in love with it. I would take that 50S Mark II everywhere for me for travel, regardless of the weight, because I was just in love with how the image is rendered. So, and like aside from that though, like I know that medium format cameras aren't well known for their autofocus, right? That's one. Two is that you tend to slow down using like a medium format camera, which is natural because it's such a big sensor. There's so much processing data being collected from that sensor every time you click the shutter, which makes sense. In return, you get the very best image quality to date. It doesn't matter, you know, whatever high-tech like sensor comes up from Sony's full frame or Canon's full frame or any of those brands that sells full frame as their, you know, bread and butter. You can't argue physics. It's a whole different experience for me now, coming from the 50S Mark II to the 100S Mark II. So spec-wise, from what Fuji has said on their announcement and all their, like, you know, media news articles about it, is that it's using a new 102 megapixel sensor. I think it derives from the same sensor as the 100 Mark II. I believe it's toned down to the point where it is as fast as the 102. Nice addition of the upgraded CPU processor and the additional like subject tracking and autofocus improvements overall. That is a welcome upgrade in my opinion, especially, you know, if you're like me who's coming from a 50S Mark II or any of the older generations that have not so great autofocus. I think that upgrade alone is a seller in my opinion. The body of the 100S Mark II is the same as the 100, same layout, same everything. The only difference is just the texture of the 100S Mark II is taken directly from the 102. Other than that, everything's the same. You use the same batteries that's derived from the 50S Mark II, the XT4, XT5, XT2, all like the recent additions to Fuji's camera lineup. Also, I can't forget that they also added an addition of like f-log2 to the 100S Mark II. I think that's like a nice addition, but it's not mandatory. So if you're in a pinch and you want to record a video of where you are, or, you know, of like your kids or someone or wherever you are, there is an option where you could record in 4K 30 frames per second at 42210 bit at f-log2, but there is going to be a bit of a crop regardless. But yeah, it's there though. It's nice to have. So my initial experience with the GFX is that was very seamless, like, because all the buttons, the settings, everything was essentially the same for the 50S Mark II, which is, you know, which is great, right? So I was able to get in, feel comfortable on shooting with it in my, you know, wedding sessions, portrait sessions, or just out and about doing street photography and landscapes. And like, oof, it's great. The additional extra 50 megapixels is really nice because I can crop in a lot more than I could before and retain like a lot of the sharpness and detail, which is like wild for me. So it works great if for like portraits and I want to like crop in a little detail of my subject, or even product photography, or if I'm taking out with me to do some landscape like photography of the mountains, the ocean, the lakes, forests and whatnot, I can just crop in to frame it better, which is really nice. The only downside is the files are huge. I think each one raw file is what, 236 megs, give or take, uncompressed. And yeah, I'm definitely feeling it on the storage department, so I had to buy a couple more drives to upgrade my cloud storage to accommodate the bigger files coming from the GFX. With the 100S Mark II, trying the new updated autofocus system, you know, the subject tracking, the AFC, it is miles better than the GFX 50S Mark II and better than the 100 Mark I. Now, let's talk about the lens. So coming from, you know, from a crop sensor or in full frame to a mirror format, depending where you are, the lens are huge. The native lens, at least, like the 80 millimeter f1.7, that thing's huge. It's like by far like the biggest prime lens in terms of size. When it comes to the amount of lens you can use with the GFX, there isn't a lot in terms of like native lens. Like Fuji's working really hard, I believe, of releasing new lens. I know that they just announced like the new super telephoto lens for wild photography. That thing looks cool and huge, but it's not my thing. I don't do wild photography and whatnot. But overall, though, like their medium format native lens are huge, like in terms of size. You can mitigate that by adapting vintage lens with your GFX. So, for example, like I've mentioned earlier that I used to adapt the Manola MD-MC lens. Those things are tiny, very, very, very tiny, and they were able to cover the whole sensor with a soft vignetting on the corners. But if you were to close down your aperture, the vignetting is gone, completely gone, and image quality is still as good, with like that filmic look to it and that character that we all want. Or you can look into third-party medium format lens. So, for example, the Minicon 65mm f1.4, that is a really good lens for the price point, and just the build quality of it is outrageous. I'm surprised that it doesn't cost more than the MSRP, and I believe the MSRP is like 600 Canadian, I believe, or 700 around there. And you know, it's the image quality and rendering out of that is so good. A few minor things that I don't like about my GFX is that I wish that Fuji gave us the same EVF from the 100 Mark II into the 100S Mark II. I've used the 100 Mark II, and the EVF was so good. It was like, it's good. It's like I have another pair of eyes just seeing through it, and I just wish that they brought it over to the 100S Mark II. I'm like not saying the 100S Mark II's EVF is bad. It's actually a nice upgrade from the 100S. You know, it's hard coming from something that's so good and getting something that's less than that. It's, you know, it kind of like warps my mind in a way. But that's just my opinion, just me being nitpicky. Last nitpick is I wish the LCD screen was a little bit better. I find that it's good enough, but I feel like it feels like more on the cheap side in terms of like the brightness and just the resolution. But that's just me though. Maybe I'm just spoiled by the 100 Mark II. Alright guys, thank you so much for taking the time to watch my video. I hope this video was very informative for you, about, you know, just about my experience of all using the new GFX and just a medium format camera in general. And yeah, if you like my content, hit the like button, don't forget to subscribe, and if you have any questions regarding about this video or just cameras or gears or how I work, feel free to leave a message in the comments. Anyways, take care. Cheers.